forward that email.
Great. Okay, then let's go ahead and get started. So welcome, everybody. Wait, I heard somebody. Who is that?
It's this Tina. I think she muted herself.
Got it. So welcome, everyone. This is the December meeting of Manhattan Community Board 4's Social and Racial Justice Task Force. And we are going to get started this evening with a presentation. And actually, I don't have it right in front of me. So Viren, do you have the introduction information you can share? Oh, and I guess I should say a couple things actually first before we get started. Yeah. I'm Katie Stokes. I'm one of the co-chairs. I'll introduce in just a moment my other co-chair. But just as a quick reminder, this meeting is being recorded this evening and will be available on our website. Per the governor's order, we are only meeting on Zoom right now for our community board meetings. So again, this is Manhattan Community Board 4's Social and Racial Justice Task Force meeting. And with that, I will turn you over to my co-chair, Viren.
Hi, thanks, Katie. Thank you, Harold, for joining us. Harold Miller is the Deputy Executive Director for External Affairs. City's newly formed Racial Justice Commission that's doing an amazing amount of work. Actually, I happen to have had a chance to attend a few of their sessions that were sort of opened up to community boards. So we are very happy to have him join us, and I'm going to hand it over to him now. Thank you, Harold.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite today. It's a pleasure to be here speaking to the Social and Racial Justice Task Force. You know, not too many of those that exist amongst community boards around the city. So it's, I'm pretty psyched to speak to a very dedicated group of folks. So what I'm going to do this evening, I'm going to go through the presentation that I've been going through for the last several months. However, though, we're at the stage of the process where we are in developing our ballot proposal. So I'm going to pivot, you know, partly through the presentation because the rest of it is about the public giving input and everything like that. And we're honestly past that point where the public will give input. But just to give you background, and then we'll go into 3 proposals based off the inequities that I'll talk about that is being that the commissioners are considering, and then I'll do the best I can to answer some questions. So I'm going to share my screen. I just need a capability to do so.
Okay, here I'll make you co-host so you can share your screen. Do you see it now?
Yep.
Great.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. So the commission was formed by Mayor Bill de Blasio back in March of this year. And it has 11 commissioners appointed. Our chair is Jennifer Jones Austin, and our vice chair is Henry Garrido. And they began to meet as a full commission back in April of this year. So the mission of the Racial Justice Commission is to empower with the legal authority of the Charter Revision Commission, will seize the transformative potential of the moment in history to identify and propose structural changes and significant policy reforms that will advance racial justice and equity and begin to dismantle structural racism for all New Yorkers. This work is necessary because systemic racism has been and continues to shape our reality. So some of the other members of the commission includes Kay Bain, who's the founding and executive director of Community Capacity Development, Anna Bermudez, who is commissioner of the Department of Probation, Reverend Fred Davey, executive vice president of Union Theological Seminary, and the chair of the CCRB, Lurie Daniel Favors, Interim Director at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College. Derek Hamilton, Founding Director at the Institute on Race and Political Economy at the New School, and Henry Cohen, Professor of Economics and Urban Policy. Chris Q, former Executive Director of Asian Americans for Equality. Yesenia Mata, Executive Director of La Comina. Phil Thompson, who is Deputy Mayor for Strategic Policies and Initiatives. And then Joanne Yu, Executive Director of the Asian Federation, makes up our list of commissioners. So for those who may not know, the charter is also our city's constitution. It defines the organization, powers, functions, and essential procedures of city government, from elected officials to the budgeting process. It lays out the fundamental structures of city government, controls how decisions are made, and details the budget towards projects in housing, education, to human rights and emergency services. So the charter influences organization, officials, agencies, city staff, the process, laws, local elections, public review, reporting, representation, decision-making, participation, accountability, and then money, investments contracted under the banner of resources. So I'm going to skip this because the numbers are all out of whack now. I can give you some real stats on our engagements. We had 12 input sessions. We have engaged over 1,100 people. We had 34 presentations, with including about 21 community board presentations alone. We have testimony from online testimony from over 1,000 folks, and we have conducted about a dozen focus groups and about 50 one-on-one presentations during our engagement process. So we try to be intentional with a little bit of resources as possible to touch as many people as possible. So as you see on the other side, it kind of goes through a timeline of when the engagement period was. From July through September was the first half of the engagement. We released our interim report, which I'll get to in a second, in early October. And then since October through now, been in a second phase of public engagement while we're collecting that information, starting to shape out our ballot proposed measures, as well as a racial justice roadmap. And so we're in a period now where we're forming our final report. I'm doing my part in writing along with the entire team. So all of us are contributing to it. And the attorneys on the team are literally writing the ballot proposals with the law department as we speak. And as well as we are putting together a racial justice roadmap of things that we heard from the public that we found that's worthy for further explanation, or something that the public should be aware that it was considered, but for various reasons that we want to include it, because we know that the fight for racial equity doesn't end with this charter revision, and we know we're not going to solve racism in this one charter commission. So the roadmap serves as a blueprint of ideas that not only the city can take up moving forward, but state and federal government should consider moving forward in the pursuit of greater racial equity. So the key takeaways from the interim report was that we had identified 6 inequities that kind of capture a lot of what we heard. And the 6 inequities were the inequity in quality services that promote social and emotional well-being, the inequity in work, advancement, and wealth building, inequity within and across neighborhoods that inhibits thriving individuals, families, and communities, marginalization and over-criminalization of BIPOC, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, persons, and communities, inequity in representation and decision-making, and enforcement and accountability of government entities, or the lack of. And just to break it down, when we talk about inequity in services, the themes that we heard was the lack of quality education for BIPOC New Yorkers, decay of and lack of access to affordable low-income housing, lack of support for early learning foundations, scarcity of mental health services, and coordination of care was some of what we heard under the banner of quality services. When we talk about inequity and work advancement, wealth building, the themes that we heard was inequity in employment, lack of economic mobility, insufficient participation for the future, or preparation, I'm sorry, insufficient preparation for the future, unjust procurement, lack of access to capital, and similar resources. Inequity within and across neighborhoods, those themes that we heard was resources not distributed equitably, responsibilities not distributed equitably, racial equity not prioritized in land use decisions, lack of community ownership and control. When it came to marginalization and overcriminalization, the themes that we heard from the public were the need to reimagine public safety, improper focus on punishment instead of care, lifelong marginalization, overcriminalization beyond policing, marginalization creating segregation, over-reliance on violent or adversarial methods, and then inequity and representation spoke about lack of community power, failure to prioritize racial equity in city decision-making, lack of representation in government, lack of civic participation. And then when it came to accountability of government and entities, the themes were laws to protect against discrimination did not work well enough, the need for stronger enforcement of institutions, lack of access to legal services, communities' demands often remain unmet, lack of transparency or accountability in addressing community input, agency tracking not being meaningful, lack of accountability for police misconduct, laws to protect workers' rights are not strong enough. So, you know, those were the patterns and equities that shaped how we wanted to move forward with the work. And then from there took what we heard over the last few months and start to sharpen what will become concepts of our ballot proposals. Unfortunately, I'm not able to share it on screen, but what I will say verbally, some of the themes, the concepts that we are working through right now, and the commission is set to vote on in the next couple of weeks. We want to create a preamble to the charter. Before I get into that part, just want to highlight any additional questions, anything related to Racial Justice Commission. Our website is the best place to find and to learn more about the work and being able to follow the next steps of the commission's work. Stay in touch through our website. If you have particular comments or questions, you can always email us at racialjustice@charter. I'll also put my personal email in the chat. So that's racialjustice@charter.nyc.gov. And then you can always follow us on social media at Racial Justice NY on Twitter, or on Instagram, Racial Justice NYC on Instagram or Facebook, are some of the ways to continue to stay in touch with us. So like I was saying, that we are in the midst of having our commissioners start to finalize ballot proposals, and those ballot proposals will be voted on by the public in 2022, November of 2022. And so the idea, so the three questions that we are likely, and this is not like confirmed, but we're heading in that direction and just sharing amongst friends, is that first question will be a statement of values by creating a preamble to the charter. The preamble will sets out how government should protect and uphold the values and rights for all New Yorkers. The second question will be on creating a racial equity office that would have a chief equity officer and would oversee a process of creating a racial equity plan that city agencies need to come up with their own plan, and then now fold into a citywide racial equity plan that should be presented potentially every 2 years. And as well as creation of a racial equity office that a racial equity commission that will be made up of the general public, potentially, folks from different parts of the city sent on this commission, working with the equity office to create the citywide equity plan. And then the third question is creating a true cost of living measure that will track the actual costs for New York residents to meet essential needs, including housing, food, childcare, transportation, and other essential costs, and in order to inform programmatic and policy decisions. And then the city will be required on some sort of regular basis, whether it be annual or biannual or however we sort it out, a true cost of living benchmark. So those are the three very likely proposals. The resolution was just passed about a week ago by the commission. And so they have to do a final vote before it goes to our city clerk's office, and then it'll appear on your ballots come next year. So I'll pause for a second and just see if there's questions.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I guess you guys just didn't feel like taking on, the easy things. You wanted to go a little deeper. That's really amazing. So let me turn it over, because I have a couple of questions, but first, what about others? Viren, Leslie, any questions? And anybody else who's joined us?
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead, Leslie.
Yeah, I just have for clarification purposes, maybe I missed the beginning of the conversation, but I wanted to know, who did you speak to? Who did you contact? How were the meetings conducted in order to garner the information that you put together in this document? What was the process like?
That's a great question, and I'll dive a little bit more into that. So there's a couple of tracks that we used. One, we had 12 public input sessions. 8 of the 12 were in person. We did one in each borough. We did the Bronx twice, Manhattan twice, Brooklyn twice. Those public input sessions were open to the public, and they gave testimony for about 3 minutes on how racial inequity has affected their lives, or ideas to create greater racial equity in the city. And so, people talked about many different issues about housing justice, education, healthcare, and we try to listen to what patterns that came about every time people spoke. And so, our team started to kind of really analyze what they were saying, and start to see if we could put it in structural categories. At the same time, we had, and you can watch the videos of it on our YouTube channel. If you go into the search key, Racial Justice Commission on YouTube, we have what's called Transforming Foundational Panel Series. This was a series of discussions that the commissioners had with experts in various disciplines of society. So we spoke to education experts, we spoke to housing experts, we spoke to early child care experts, we spoke to those who were experts in economic justice. We spoke to those who spoke about intersectionality, to get their perspective on what in their opinions were the structural inequities that existed within that particular issue area or discipline, and what were their ideas of how we can, as a city, move forward into a more racially equitable society. And then the third major piece that we had an online survey, and we actually sent the survey out to every city worker into their email box. So we work with Department of Citywide Administrative Services, and they were able to put the survey into the emails of every city employee, and we got back thousands of responses from there, as well as we had it for the general public, and the public responded that as well. And then we also worked with some consultants to put together focus groups that kind of deep dive a bit into certain policy areas that groups were had, issues that they're working on. So we worked with housing groups and education groups and those involved in the criminal justice system, and get their perspective. So not quite the experts, like the academic experts, but those who are doing the grassroots organizing around those particular issue areas. We were working with them as well and receive input from them. So we try to be as broad and try to talk to as many people as we possibly can with the resources that we had. New York, as we all know, is a big place, and talking to thousands of people feels like a lot, but it's not a lot, and we are try to, my goal was to talk to every community board. I spoke to more than half of the community boards of the city over the last 2 months. I think I've spoken to every Manhattan community board, and I have spoken to majority of the Bronx community boards and majority of the Brooklyn ones. So, we try to go as far and wide as possible, and take all that input and try to see how we can actually create proposals that were broad, that were bold, and that they were structural. And some people may look at the proposals that we put forth and like, well, it doesn't directly touch our issue. Well, because we were trying not to get into the legislative process that the city council and the executive office is responsible for. What the commission is looking to do is like, what can we do within the charter to change structural inequities in the charter? And so we feel like if we put forth a set of values with the preamble, that kind of set a tone of like what the city should value and how justice should look like in the city. That's one thing. We also say if we create a racial equity office with a chief equity officer, they can actually deep dive into each agency and work with individual agencies to create greater racial equity plans that would address some of the structural inequities that agencies have been persisting for generations, whether it be NYPD, whether it be HPD, whether it be even DYCD. Every agency, we can find strands of structural inequities rooted into the structures of their agency. And so that office will be charged is to work with those agencies to root out structural racism moving forward. And then, when it comes to the true cost of living, having the city really take a honest look about how difficult it is to live here, even though true cost of living probably, benefits everyone. But people of color have been disproportionately affected by the rise in cost of living here in the city, whether it be food, rent, transportation costs. And so if the city could put forth policies moving forward that would give policymakers a real sense of what the true cost of living would be, we could probably create better policies moving forward that'll continue to shrink the gaps in poverty that we do see in our city, and shrinking poverty levels will in fact help so many people of color in the city and in an outsized way. So
Great, thank you for that. Viren?
Yeah, thank you, Harold. That was very, very comprehensive.
Actually, hold on, Viren. Yeah, Jesse?
Darren, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just because I'm going to have to leave soon. This is a extremely important conversation. I just wanted to, but I'm going to have to bounce off shortly. First off, thank you, Harold. I know we've struggled to get you on the agenda over the last few months, so I appreciate your patience and I appreciate you showing up tonight. I just want to get clarity for the efforts of this task force. I know that you guys have done a lot of outreach. You've heard a lot of comments. Is there, in terms of opportunity for any other future comments from a community board, what is the time frame around that, if there is any going forward?
Well, no, appreciate the question. Yeah, we're at a point where we are working internally to put forth the proposals that I mentioned. So it's kind of in the hands of the lawyers, and to make sure the language is sound, and parts of the charter that will be affected by it can work. And so we kind of passed the point where we can take additional input in. What I will say is that we're in the middle of writing our roadmap for racial justice. So if there are particular ideas to further racial equity, you could certainly send that in, and then we are going to write the report up to the last minute, which is likely to be somewhere around Christmas. We'll continue to be tightening up that report. So it's time to give me input on that piece at least, and say, well, here's some things that the roadmap can talk about how we can actually address racial equity moving forward. And so you kind of have an advantage, because you kind of the cat's out the bag about specifics about what the ballot proposals will most likely look like. So the things that you can help us with will be the things that will fall outside of that, and that can likely fall into our racial justice roadmap.
Okay, that's really helpful. Just in terms of timing, guys, I just want to make sure if by chance we weren't going to get that to you until the new year, because of our full board doesn't meet until the first week of January, would that still be acceptable?
Well, the final report itself will have to be completed before the new year.
Okay.
Our goal in year 2 is education. So we could add I'm one to never say no. I'm assuming that there'll be a final report that exists, and then maybe we could put some amendments to the report, after the fact.
Okay.
I'm confident that,
so I appreciate it, Harold. So in terms of this process, Katie and Viren, I mean, tonight you guys could certainly, if you guys wanted to, discuss the idea of making some type of comment out of the task force. You don't have a quorum, so just recognize that. I just want to be clear, just in case anybody from the public is watching and understanding what the body is. So I think you would be sending a kind of a consensus of the group that's here. We've done this in the past. You're sending a consensus. It would be going to, I think you'd be sending it to exec. Unfortunately, I don't think exec is going to be meeting, because it's right smack in between Christmas and New Year's. So I think the reality is it's going to have to come out of full board, which is that first week in January, in terms of a body process. So just in the mindset of that, you certainly can bring this up with Lowell if something comes out tonight that you guys feel that needs to get out, sooner. But I think that's just in terms of process. I just wanted to flag that out for everybody, and make sure you guys were aware of that.
Great,
I
thank you.
think, Jesse, that's very useful. I think what I liked about what Harold just said, that potentially if we do come up with something after Christmas, after the new year, they are open to sort of amend the report.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say this, you guys have written plenty of letters that touch on a lot of the topics that I think Harold is part. So if you wanted to do something in the terms of an administrative letter,
Yeah.
To the commission, and then attaching the existing letters and saying these are the topics that we had focused on, and therefore, you know, please review these letters to make sure that, you know, we could do that tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? That's something that can be done. So an administrative letter, you're not putting out any new policy, you're not taking any new stand, you're just simply saying, here are, if you have questions for the commission, you can definitely put those in the administrative letter, but you could just sort of do a summary letter. It's like a cover letter, and then including the letters that you've written already on the topic. So that might be something you could do as well.
So Jesse, let me ask you this question. We have a bunch of recommendations that we made last year, and many of them have quite a few overlaps with what Racial Justice Commission is already doing. If we find summary of items that we feel might not have been covered, that could sort of basically formulate this letter. Would you say that?
I'm sorry. So you're taking the recommendations that the working group then task force, and you want to submit those as
Not all of them, just the ones that we feel are not covered.
that are not covered, but that have already been voted on by the board.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Not covered by the Racial Justice Commission.
No, I understand what you're saying, but our body, our board
Has already voted.
Has already voted on them. So yes, that's completely fine. And saying, you know, here are all of our recommendations. We would like to particularly highlight these that we feel that either are outside of the current, you know, the current proposals for the charter, or maybe the roadmap, you know, the roadmap for racial and social justice. So yeah, that's fine. As long as the board has voted on it,
Yes.
it's fine with us. So
everything would be pulled from what the board has voted on, and everything.
Yes, you could completely do that.
Some of the letters.
That's why I just wanted to say, if there's anything new tonight, then that would be a little more complicated, and we would have to maneuver, find a strategy for that to happen. So yeah, if you would like to do that completely, and again, I would recommend, since you're not having it as a you know, because you could do it as an admin letter, I think, in my opinion. So therefore, you're not waiting on full board, and it's also not going, like you guys said, it's already stuff that you all voted on. So
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you,
right.
Jesse.
Thank you. And Harold, if there's anything that I think we've sent out everything you've sent us in the past on stuff, but in case I haven't, please send me anything you'd like me to post or shoot out to our server, and anything along those lines.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. All right. So Viren, over to your question.
Yes, and before I ask my question, also before Jesse leaves, Jesse, I don't know, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I think maybe it's a good idea to re-invite Harold to come and speak with the full board sometime in the future.
I think that's, I mean, that's completely fine. Our normal process is we like to have something like this come to a committee first, and I think that was always sort of the push and pull of getting Harold here. And I'm glad we did finally. So that's completely fine. If you'd like to shoot me and I think it'd be Jeffrey, honestly, at this point, maybe copy Lowell, as to idea of putting them on in January. Again, I don't know if that's a helpful, the most effective time for Harold. You would let me know, but I mean, if it doesn't matter at this point, I think maybe that's fine. I mean, but we could certainly put you on in January.
I'll be more than happy to come in January, because it just give me a head start on the education campaign, and I'm going to need everybody's help, as many people as possible, to help educate. If you can educate 2 additional New Yorkers that I may not be able to reach, we want a well-educated public about these ballot proposals, you know,
Sure.
and hopefully they'll support it, but I want to make sure that they understand it. And then if they have, you know, issues with it, that's one thing. But, you know, a lot of times people go into the ballot and have no idea what these ballot questions are about, where it came from. And I definitely will need as many people help as possible to spread the knowledge about the intent and the purpose of these ballot proposals.
So I'll just jump. I don't mean to be taking up all the airtime here, honestly. But I think that's great. We can easily do that. I don't think that's an issue. Are the ballot proposals will be official by then, right? Though.
Yes.
Okay, great. So then, I mean, something for maybe Varen, Katie, and the rest of the task force to think about. Why not think about in the new year that you guys could focus maybe a little bit on an education component in an event of some sort, and we can really kind of do upgraded, let's say upgraded outreach, upgraded press about that. And again, it's all virtual, so it's not and I think that Harold coming in January, first week of January, is better because we still don't know what's going to happen halfway through January with the open meetings law. So I rather have this security of knowing we're still going to be on Zoom come January. I think it's 5th or something like that.
Things are looking, Jesse, I think we'll be on Zoom for a good while.
Listen, I would agree with you, but we've been, just so you know, we had a hiccup in July, and we all had to jump into in-person meetings in the middle of July. So I really hope that the state gets it together. But so why don't we, for sure. So Varen and Katie, can you send an email to Jeffrey and copy me and with that request for January? And then I think we can talk about something if we really want to work with the commission on a more specific education event, and we can have panels, you can have folks from the neighborhood, we can come up with something kind of creative and very local. I think if we think of it local, focus on it local, I think that's going to make a big difference.
Will do, Jesse. Thank you so much. I think we'll definitely.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Jesse.
Take care.
Okay, you know what? I can wait if anybody else has a question first and they want to go before me. I'm happy to let you do that.
I had just one more question of
Go ahead.
Harold, and that was, were there any surprises, Harold, when you send out the survey to the city agencies? Was there something that jumped out at you that said, oh no, or great? What kind of experience did you have?
That is a very interesting question. I think, well, for me, I'm a lifelong New Yorker. So I've been here, I'm 40 years old. So I've, lived in the city all my life except for a 5-year period. But what shocked some of my colleagues, though, was some of the visceral reaction against racial equity by some of the city workers and certain agencies. Some folks.
How was that expressed? Like in what way?
Well, some I can't repeat, because of the language, but, some thought that, there's no such thing as racism, and, we have achieved racial equity in the city. We're trying to, impose, socialism on people, so just like, these, not to be like political here, but just kind of right wing, kind of talking points. Stuff can you hear about, school boards debating over critical race theory, you kind of hearing like, some of the responses to the survey, like we're trying to like force, racial equity down people's throats. It wasn't that many, but, it surprised some of my colleagues, who I don't think, they weren't around, to see, what happened in Bensonhurst or, Howard Beach and things like that back in the day. So, they don't know there's a history of racial tension that kind of is the undercurrent in the city. And some of that showed, when you could send in an anonymous, survey, people can, write whatever they want. And these are city workers. It's not like just not like just some random, teenager, who's just doing a joke. These are folks who are employed by the city of New York. So, but it was anonymous, so we don't know. We know what agency, but we don't know specifically, Though, and in fairness, we'll protect their privacy just like everyone else who submitted the survey, regardless. But yeah, but a handful of agencies, had that, some from PD, some from buildings department, some from even Department of Education, so yeah.
No, I'm just going to add, it doesn't surprise me, right? I mean, the city has changed over the last 20 years so dramatically, both in terms of demographics, in terms of shifts and the flows of people coming in and out. So it's a very different city than what it used to be in the 60s and what it used to be in the 80s and what it is today, right? So that doesn't kind of totally surprise me. But yes, what surprises me is that it comes from folks from city agencies. That does sort of throw me off a bit.
Yeah.
Since we are on the topic of education, I mean, one thing that I want to sort of put on the table before I go to my main question is segregation in schools. And it's kind of a continuing plan. It seems like everything is okay, but it's not okay.
Right.
And we conducted a sort of big study just completed a couple of weeks ago at Pratt Institute, where we're looking at segregation in education in New York City itself. And the numbers are quite telling. So is that something that the commission will be doing moving forward in terms of collecting data and research so that they can actually design the policies and programs to address these in a sort of much more systematic way? Is that what one of the roles would be?
That's a good question, because it kind of sets up what, if passed, what the Racial Equity Office can potentially do, and is work with the Department of Education as the added resource to kind of figure out an equity plan within that particular agency. And part of the equity plan can include, or may include, how you further, desegregate the schools. Because obviously school segregation has been something that's been extremely controversial and extremely hard to do around the city. And is not really an easy fix. I mean, most children go to school in their community, and quite honestly, our communities are segregated. And so how do you actually create a system where you don't just have just Black schools or just white schools in zip codes where you just have Black neighborhoods and white neighborhoods? It's like, how do you achieve that? And I don't think there's an answer at the moment, but what we want to put forth is a structure that can work with agencies to come to figure out that answer, and use data, use research, use best practices in other cities, bring in experts, work with the community by having a commission that's made up of community members to help inform what policies may work in addressing that type of situation. That is our goal. That's our hope. But a lot of the variables will rest on the administration that comes after. The commission can put forth these ideas, can put forth a vision, but it's not totally clear if not even putting Eric Adams on the spot, but the administration after that, will they utilize the Racial Equity Office to its full potential? Will it try to achieve that mission? And you never know. But we hope that we put in something structural and something that's embedded and something that the public will hold accountable moving forward, that it will do that work even beyond the initial, fanfare of it, once it becomes more part of the system.
But I guess it's also, sorry, what were you going to say, Viren?
No, I'm just going to complete the question that I want to ask you. I mean, this goes much deeper. That's a very good answer, but at the same time, school segregation goes much deeper, right? It ties into sort of housing and service component as well. And anytime somebody's looking for buying a real estate property, they want to look at what is a school district, right?
Yes.
I mean, so it's by design so intertwined that it's not solving one thing. It's solving sort of whole network of sort of entanglements.
Yes.
that you need to work on. I'm not going to hog too much of your time or the mic time. I'm just going to quickly ask you 2 questions. Very comprehensive set of ideas and information that you just shared with us. Tiny question. How was the commission put together, and how the commissioners were sort of, picked? In the sense, were they handpicked, or were there sort of other agency inputs? How was it structured? How did it come about?
Another good question. I wasn't there when it was formed. I actually was not working in the city at the moment. Though I have worked for the city for 8 years, I actually was I was a candidate for city council during this period of time in the beginning. And then once my race ended and I wasn't successful, I was fortunate to join the team. But from what I understood how the process worked, the mayor worked with a handful of advisors, some who are still in the administration, some are not, and try to come up with a roster of people that have been doing the work for a long time, that come from a diverse background, not only racial diversity, but nonprofit, labor, clergy, working in immigrant populations, working with Asians, the Asian population, working with Christian population, so we try to develop a group of folks that bring different assets to the table, but all are committed to have demonstrated in their own work over the years, demonstrated the work towards racial equity, and racial justice. And so, if you look at the bios of each of the commissioners, they have done the work even before joining the commission around fighting for racial equity. And so that was a big thing, having, representation of peoples of color across the board. It wasn't a full representation. There's some ethnicities and some races that are not at the table, but, wasn't intentional. I think it only could be a certain size. And, but they did their best to make that up. For where we fell short, I tried with the best intentions to engage with those populations, to seek their input, to make sure that they stayed in close communication with us, because, I wanted to make sure the commissioners had heard from the disability community, heard from the Muslim community, heard from, the indigenous, people community. And so it was important for our team to make sure that we were intentional about touching those groups as well, and making sure that their voices and their input was included.
I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to hog too much time, so I'm going to move on. I have a follow-up question, but I'll come back to it. Anybody else, please go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple questions. So just, Harold, this has really been interesting to hear about, but I guess I'm wondering, so it sounds like the commission in 2022 is not going to be focused on sort of starting to develop a racial equity plan or different parts of the plan. It's really focused on, as you said, education about the proposals that will be voted on in November of 2022. Is that right?
Right. Yes. We want to make sure that the public understands it and supports it, because there'll be no point of doing this work if the public doesn't vote in favor of it. Then we'll have to get back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I mean, because it sounds like for example, it's been well known for years that New York City's public schools are very segregated, and there have been lots of commissions and parent groups and chancellors appointed committees and all sorts of groups looking into it. So it's not like there haven't been lots of people looking into it. And as you said, it's such a complicated issue, but clearly many things need to be done to address it. but it sounds like it's through the commission. Specific policy work isn't going to be done in the next year because the commission's goal is just to get, not just, but is to get these policies adopted. And then once a racial equity officer and office is put into place, then they would be sort of helping shepherd in all of the city agencies racial equity plans. Is that right?
Right. Yes.
So it's sort of a longer term vision.
Yes.
And as you said about putting the structure in place, because even though there's lots of work being done in different places, it's going to sort of help pull it all together structurally. Is that right? The goal?
That's the goal. Because I don't want to discount the fact that there was a commission to not commission but task force to address school segregation. There's folks working on police reform. There's folks working on health inequities. There's folks, agencies are doing a lot of this work, and then sometimes they're empowered to, put things that are big and bold moving forward. Sometimes it may get stymied because of bureaucracy. Sometimes it is falling a bit short because, they don't have the resources to, go further. And, the way we're looking at it is like, if you have an office that is dedicated to looking at racial inequities in the city government and how it can every day work with agencies to advance racial equity, that a lot of the ideas that my colleagues in various different agencies have been trying to push forward for the last several years can actually have that boost forward and be a part of a larger framework that kind of brings this all together. Because really, there's really no person or no entity that currently is looking at racial inequity in a holistic way. You have different task forces in agencies. You have a task force that the mayor convened that I used to serve on, made up of government leaders of color. It's called the Racial Equity or Include Task Force on Racial Equity and Inclusion. That's made up of senior members from various agencies. We got together and, be honest with you, triaging the issues of COVID and a lot of the fallout from it, because COVID exposed what we all knew existed about the deeply, the deep inequities that exist in city government. So from food insecurity to housing to education, COVID exposed everything, to be honest. And our agencies were very much was shown that it had a lot of deficiencies in it. So that task force existed and still does the work to triage, I say, a lot of the inequities that goes on. And so what we're looking to do is that the racial equity office will be a place where all those ideas, all that work, all of the things that trying to achieve racial equity can be housed in, and have someone responsible or someone's be responsible in carrying that through.
Great. And I have a really ignorant question to ask. And as a community board member, I should probably know this answer. But could the new mayor establish an office of, a racial equity office on
He could
his
do it on day
own?
one.
Say it again?
You could do it on day one.
Yes, I was wondering. So this is maybe.
The charter. So I'm sorry. The charter actually will make it where it's actually embedded into the city's structure. So it actually gives it more protection, because there's a lot. If Mayor de Blasio decide I'm going to have a permanent racial equity office, another mayor can come in down the line and just end it.
Yeah.
But when it's in the charter, you need an actual charter commission to go in and take it out, and it has to be voted on by the voters. Like a mayor cannot unilaterally take it out.
So I guess my question is, so if the new mayor does maybe establish this office, I assume that the commission would still want it to be voted on next November to be added, right? So that it would, by definition, go forward, regardless of who the mayor was.
Exactly. Is to make sure it's permanent, and that that it will take only another charter commission to undo it.
Mm-hmm.
And charter commissions are hard to organize, and it's hard to because then I have to go back to the voters to say we want to end a racial equity commission. So it's not going to be like something you could just take away so easily if it's in the charter.
So then I guess I was wondering, is that something that like, I think it's the kind of thing that we would be interested in writing a letter about in the new year to the new mayor's office, saying, we think it would be great for there to be, a racial equity office. But is that the kind of thing that you guys are encouraging community boards and things to encourage the new administration about?
I wouldn't discourage it, but our priority is to make sure it's voted by the public in November. That's our goal.
Yep.
If Mayor Adams decides to create the office, I think that's a good thing, but we still want the voters to ratify it.
Okay.
So it could be in the charter.
And then my very last question, I promise, just one of the issues you mentioned during your presentation was about lack of representation, lack of diversity and representation. I wondered in your, in the public sessions and in the information that was shared with you and in the surveys and things, were there discussions or interesting suggestions that you all heard about how to address that specific problem?
I'm sure there was. There's so many there's so many conversations over time. I'm trying to think if any particular one about representation stood out. Really, there was kind of a multi-track thing. I heard a lot from folks when it came to representation. Wasn't so much about elected official offices. It was about the policymakers. It was about those who are in middle management and senior management, not so much the commissioners, but those who manage the day-to-day inner workings of government that we don't really see, that you don't really know, but write the policies, carry out the policies, decide, have like kind of decision-making power over a person's life that we don't even realize. Making sure there's greater representation there, making sure that there are people of color, in greater numbers when it comes to writing education policy, writing housing policy, writing writing land use policy overall. Because a lot of the perspective from people of color is not being represented in a lot of those rooms. And I've seen it for myself. I mean, there's a lot of people with great intentions and they mean well, and I will never accuse them of being racist, but when you have some agencies with majority white policy writers and don't really have a true perspective of the Black community, the Asian community, South Asian community, you can miss some things, and that's what has been going on. Sometimes I'll go behind the agency and it's like, I don't think this community will support this because of X, Y, Z, and they're like, oh, we didn't realize it. Well, if you have someone who actually grew up in St. Albans, who grew up in East Harlem, who grew up in Morrisania, they will know certain policies will have a disparate effect on people of color. So it's stuff like that we heard, from city workers, from the public, from those who used to work in the city. That actually stood out to me because that's something that I recognized in my time working in the mayor's office, is that I would get a call, from an agency, and they want me to like help, engage X community around this initiative. And I'm like, well, you're missing this. And I don't know if they're going to go for that. You may have to turn this around. I could put you in front of some people to, discuss it. And, when I do that, they will come back and say, well, yeah, we're going to change some things around. We're going to improve this. We're going to work, tweak that. Simply because they just we didn't have really representation in the drafting of it to begin with.
In the design phase,
yeah. And a lot of times things happen, without input from a diverse group. And to me, that's what diversity really speaks to. Having a person of color commissioner is great, but really we missed the boat, in the middle management, the policy writers, the folks who handle the day-to-day inner workings of government.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Leslie, I see that your hand went up. Sorry.
Yeah, Harold, this was a great presentation. I have a question, a concern. I know you guys are going to do outreach to the community to get their input, but the draft of what's going to be put on the ballots really needs to be well worded so that it garners support rather than people running away from voting for it. So I think that's going to be an important facet of this whole thing, is how it's written, how it's put out to the press. Really critical.
1000% agree with you. And, as we speak, we are, once the lawyers and, all them kind of sort out the legalese of it, myself and some other folks are going to take another look at it. I'm going to send it, privately to some people to say, do you understand this? Does this make sense to you? I'm not going to send it to like government people, or I want to send it to like, person who works at the bodega, like if they understand it, and make sure that like the language is plain enough for them to be able to read it and interpret what the intent is, and be able not to feel confused or overwhelmed by the proposal. So it's hard because it gotta be sort of prescriptive legally. It needs to be fairly neutral legally. It can't be like pro or or con language. So there's a balance, but that's what we're working through right now, is how it will look, and hopefully we will quickly figure that out.
Harold, the only thing I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm cutting somebody off. I have you look really tiny on the screen, but I was going to ask, but maybe this is better for a side conversation, but I'm thinking, well, if it's so balanced, does it really do what it's aimed to do?
Well, we will hope on the merits of how it's written, if it's written very neutral, and the education that we are looking to do, that people will support it. But ballot questions are supposed to be neutral as possible. Obviously, when a ballot question comes forth, you will get the sense, do they want you for it or against it? Whoever wrote it, you kind of get a sense, but at the same time, the intent is to have it as neutral as possible.
Did you guys already talk about you coming to full board and presenting at some point?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I may come early in January.
I don't know. Isn't the vote in November?
It is in November. And I will say this, I'm gonna come back a couple of times, you know.
Oh, okay.
The idea is the earlier I can share with you ballot proposals, the earlier I hope that
Get
with
some.
your networks that you can host your own meetings, talk to your neighbors, talk to your family members, you know, and kind of start to build a groundswell. And we're gonna need all 11 months to make this possible.
Yeah, Maria, we've
Yeah.
been trying to get him for last couple of months.
Hello,
And-
little person.
No, this is my son Noah.
Yes,
Did
a little
Did you eat
person
dinner
there.
already?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Hello, Noah. Sorry, Viren.
No, I was just saying that we've been trying to get Harold to come and speak to us for last couple of months. They reached out to the board and they wanted to speak to the full board, but the process requires that they come to the committee first. And our November meeting got canceled and they couldn't even make it at that time. I think the Harold was not available. So, which is why we're sort of running into this very tight sort of space of time for us to be able to provide them any further sort of feedback. So that's
Yeah,
the
but
reason.
it's November 2022.
Oh no, but they coming out with the report in Jan.
Wait, I think I'm missing something. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just to catch you up. So we are going to complete our, the commission is gonna have a final report and the ballot questions finalized the end of this month. Next year, we want to spend the entire year to educate the public about the proposals that we want ratified.
Right. That are right. So people are voting on it next November.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense what you're saying about coming at the top of the year, but and then I'm thinking coming also back to full board in the fall, next
Yeah,
fall.
come back, you know, if I could come back September, October, I would love to.
Yeah.
You've been booked, trust me.
Awesome.
I'm going to stop again. If anybody else has any questions, I'm going to hold off. Maria, you have any other questions?
No, it was really about when he's coming to full board. That was it, really. I just need
Tina.
to do some reading since I joined late.
Right, Tina.
My mute button seems to be on a fritz. This is great. I have to say I was a little disconcerted to hear of the responses by, I think, civil servants. Would that be a way of globally referring to folks? Wow, that was really, it shouldn't be a shocker, but it was greatly disappointing because we can't get buy-in by the very people that are supposed to be serving our city. I think we have a lot of work to do. So I really thank you for sharing that information.
Well, I would say the vast majority, 95% was supportive and gave good input. I was just speaking about the 5% because the original question was there any surprises? Though I wasn't surprised, I was just speaking in terms of how surprising my colleagues were about it. So just to put perspective, out of the thousands that we received, there was a very small percentage.
What sort of questions specifically were they presented with? Like, what did it look like? Was it an email? Was it a survey, Qualtrics sort of thing?
It was an email to an Airtable that asks a series of questions, you know, some open-ended questions about, you know, what their vision of racial equity will look like and ideas of how their agency can address it.
So so that it wasn't, I'm just trying to figure out how the information was collected. Did somebody go in and have to sort of categorize the responses, or was it sort of a hit the buttons, you know, I believe in this, I believe in that? Just want to get
the team went through and, you know, kind of categorized. It was kind of a, you know, painful process for those who had to do it because they had to read every single survey and then put it, and, you know, it kind of helped shape us. It forced us to create these broad categories, which turned into the patterns and inequity for our report, our interim report. Because originally we were like, okay, how do we take this information and put it in fewer than 40 buckets, you know, okay, then how do we do it in fewer than 20, and then we squeezed it down to 6. And we felt, okay, that's, as narrow as we can get it, but if we was to break it all out, it could have went into 40 different buckets of items.
So, excuse me, just to be clear, so your team went in and interpreted the actual prose, the writing and so forth. Is there a reason why you decided to do it sort of open-ended? Because I imagine, first of all, like the labor and how labor intensive it is, but I'm sure it was instructive in terms of how people really felt. But, a lot of questionnaires are done, with Qualtrics, you can do an analytics and that sort of thing. I'm just curious, is there a reason why you decided to go in the route you did versus more of a questionnaire form?
I think it was the intent of the commission and starting with our chair, who really value the public input. And so to really truly get input, we wanted to make it, as open as possible. I mean, it was hard, it was easy to like say, hey, bubble in, do you care about education? Do you care about housing? But we wanted a little deeper than that. We wanted, folks to kind of, really give some thought, give some ideas, because ultimately we wanted to create valid proposals. We want to get to this point where we can say people can see themselves in these proposals, see what they put forth in these proposals. A racial equity office is a kind of a big catch-all. A preamble is a big catch-all. True cost of living is a big, is a big and broad. But we wanted to make sure that that if we were to go in a different direction, because at the time we put out the survey, we didn't really know if we were going to have a racial equity office or true cost of living or preamble per se. Those were batted about, but we weren't married to it at the moment. So we wanted to really see, will we learn something that we haven't really discussed? Will we get something that we haven't, thought about? And honestly, I think, given all the work that goes on around the country and the city for the last several generations, the answers we generally got were not surprising. It wasn't brand new. And so we had to think intentionally, okay, how, has anyone really put these in some broader categories? And I don't think that work has been done. And so we kind of use those questionnaires and surveys to say, how we interpret it is like, quality of services, inequity in wealth building, inequity in neighborhoods, inequity in marginalization or criminalization. Marginalization and criminalization really talks about police reform, but it also talks about ACS, because, we spoke to a lot of parents who have children or that was touched by the Administration for Children's Services system and felt like they were marginalized and criminalized.
Right.
It wasn't like they were arrested or they went to jail, but to have an ACS case was traumatic for some people.
Sure.
Having children taken away from them in some cases, potentially under false pretenses. I don't know for sure, but given the input that we had and given the history of the city, we recognize that marginalization and criminalization is not just policing. It could be in the schools, it could be
Absolutely.
in housing. And so we tried to like how do we, pull these things that we're hearing into a larger, more structural framework.
Absolutely. I appreciate that because, we always think the police force are the, this huge element when there's so much that builds up below that surface that, people are having a hard time to sort of grab onto because it's a harder face. The NYPD has the face. I'm just wondering, did you see a pattern in terms of responses that were ill-informed, let's put it that way, in terms of where they were coming from?
Well, I don't think it was like malintent, I think, but, a lot of people don't know the limitations of power that the city has. So example, they're like, well, we should do X, Y, Z to the schools. Well, a lot of that is in the hands of the state.
Yeah.
We need to do X, Y, Z to rent laws, hands of the state. Reparations might be better taken up with the federal government, given that the continental slave trade was something that crossed state lines. And so how do you sort through who is entitled to reparations without having a more broader national conversation? Because New York City did have its role. New York City did benefit from the slave trade and the stolen the land of indigenous people. But it was bigger than New York. And so, and banks that insured, African bodies are multinational now. Like JP Morgan Chase and other, entities. So how do you ask for them, to repay, African people for what they did in New York City without in a larger context of New York State and the United States as a whole? So,
and also Native Americans. But would you be willing to share what you sent out to people so that we can kind of see exactly what people were responding to?
Oh, the surveys? Yeah, I'll dig for it, and I can send it to Jesse when I find it.
Yeah, I would love to see it. It would be very instructive. Thank you for your work. I did have one silly question. When I moved to New York, it struck me how we were subjected to the hands of New York State. And maybe somebody could weigh in on this because I don't understand. Is there any way we can change the laws in Albany to give us more autonomy?
We have to lean on our state legislators and our governor in order to make that happen. Our rent laws, people think the city controls rent laws. No, city doesn't control the rent laws. City doesn't control transportation, mass transit. The state does. City doesn't control education policy to a certain extent. A lot of it is state mandates. And so, yeah, I think if the public knew how much control Albany had, they will probably be more demanding of the state legislature to be more responsive to New York City or to give us more home rule. But that's a lot of work, and that's
it is a lot of work.
And it's by design, to be honest. I know
Sure,
we're being
absolutely.
recorded, and I don't know. I guess on a Tuesday night, I feel comfortable just to say that.
Yeah,
It is by design that New York State hold that much power, where half the legislature comes from outside of New York City. And they set forth policies that are not in the best intentions for us,
Yeah.
And you had governors in the past that benefited from that. It keeps power in Albany if you control the largest city in the country.
Exactly. Quite frankly, just on the record, I think that is a source of a lot of our ills. To be, it's intractable if we can't have, govern our own city. We're subjected to. What you're saying means so much, and I know it's an uphill battle to change anything, but I find it highly problematic that people do not understand how much Albany has control over the city. And I think that really exacerbates and compounds the problems we're having here.
Yeah, and that's why I always chuckle at, this so-called feud between Cuomo and de Blasio. It wasn't a feud, it was bullying. Because the state has so much more control over the city. And, a feud is when we kind of on more equal footing. It wasn't equal footing. It never was. And that was a frustrating part, you know, working in this administration, witnessing a bullying, you know. And
Thank you. Thank you for your frankness. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Now, just to give you a little context to what Tina was just talking about, I mean, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of transportation regulations that affect New York City even today were designed by the commissioners that actually, reported to the governor. So starting with Robert Moses, he was not the commissioner of New York City planning before that, he was actually the commissioner of transportation, statewide transportation commission. And a lot of the laws that have affected the urban renewal programs that affected New York City, the highways that sort of divided neighborhoods across the state, but more so within New York City, were designed under the roof of governorship, much more than the mayoral sort of oversight.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, go ahead, Tina.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think that might be something we can consider as the task force to educate our, our fellow New Yorkers in terms of it. You know, we do have these problems, and let's point the finger at where they originate in terms of us not being able to make the kind of changes we need to make on the timeline we need to make it. I think educating people about this helps. Education is power, and we need to hold people accountable. And the problem is, Albany is upstate, and people feel like they're so far away, and they have their city council members, and it becomes all confusing. I mean, I'll tell a little story. I had an issue with a legal issue. And I went up to Albany and I spoke to the Ways and Means Committee and the Department of Finance. And it was very interesting. These civil servants were like all ears because they said nobody comes up and visits us. And we weren't asking to speak with necessarily the politicians. We were asking to speak with members of their administration. And I think that's something that we have to educate our people, our New Yorkers here, that we do have agency. Like, having agency is so important, and understanding you have agency. And I'm just hoping that's something that we can emphasize and get out there. Like, this is energy. Use your energy. You don't have to be frustrated. It's hard work. And my whole thing is you live in the democracy you deserve.
Yeah.
We all
absolutely.
We all have to like do the work.
Right, exactly.
So anyway, that's from my soapbox.
Right. So, Tina, just to give you one very sort of glaring example of what our community board is going through right now with the Empire State Station project. The jurisdiction is by the state, and it's going to affect the lives of this city. Right?
Absolutely, and the women's building, the whole disaster of the women's building. That was Albany.
Yeah. So there are a lot of
corporation.
Yeah, there are a lot of these projects that actually affect our lives directly, but we have no direct control over. So starting with Battery Park City downtown, Hudson Yards, Penn Station, you name it. You name it. All the giant basic infrastructure projects are not controlled by the city. That actually bears the sort of brunt of it. Anyway, we can go on and on, but I think you're right, the point is maybe this task force needs to sort of find a way of bringing this idea, this sort of, what do you call them? What do you call them? So educational sort of thing.
Yeah.
Educate people as to how our lives are affected by different sort of state agencies.
Yeah, and I would even consider like connect the dots. This is the problem. These are the people in control. Like, how does it work? Because we are in it, and it's up, and we even have difficulty like figuring out that all the different tentacles. But I think if we want to make change, real change, it has to involve Albany, and it has to involve citizens understanding that they can have an impact on Albany. I mean, that's, you know, when I was in Albany and anyway, it was something on torture, you know, people went around lobbying, you go through the lobby, and, most people were not ordinary citizens. They were lobbyists. And people don't understand, hey, we can lobby, that's our right. We don't have to allow all these, interests to gain and, monopolize the attention of the legislators. So that's just something I'm sort of want to, broaden out and bring in sort of, understanding the lines. What's connecting what, who is at fault to a certain degree without attribution.
I think it's a really important point you make, Tina, because it's one of the things we've talked about on this task force is we want to be really clear on talking about things that we can actually make a difference on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's also really important that part of the piece is that we can provide education locally about how on some of these bigger issues, there has to be lobbying and there has to be state action, right? But we wouldn't want the message to be, yeah, actually, so much of this is at the state level, nothing we can do here, right? Like that's not the
The
message at all.
opposite of that.
Right.
Empowering people with education, empowering people with, excitement. It's just,
and also, but like to identify what we can, where we can move the, the ball here.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it's a perfect opportunity in 2022 because you have a governor's race, to leverage, and every state legislature and every state senator is up for re-election, or and I know there's an open seat in whereabouts, so that you take those opportunities to leverage it.
Yeah, right. I'm just going to turn it back to where we were. The state and city sort of schism is something that is very well known in the city. A lot of people don't recognize it. No, that's absolutely right. Housing, transportation, and mass transit. Three of the sort of very significant issues that affect the city are actually under the control of state. And that changes the sort of dynamics, in a significant way. But bringing the conversation back to Racial Justice Commission, a couple of things I wanted to sort of try and understand, if you don't mind. And there are so many questions we can keep here all night, but I don't think we want to do that.
Yeah, my kids came in here twice, so I gotta put them to bed soon.
This is my last question. I'm going to stop after that. The question I have is that, what is the jurisdiction? What is your oversight reach? You mentioned a bunch of task force that are doing different things, right? And do you have any oversight? Do you have any sort of jurisdiction over the work that they do? Or is it something that they feed you and then you take it from there?
Well, currently there's no oversight. The commission is a standalone. It's there the only site it has is it could go into the charter and put forth proposals to change charter, charter text, it can change, what's in the charter. That's the only oversight that the commission has. Doesn't have any oversight of a particular agency or a particular, at this point. When we get to a point where the racial equity office is ratified, then that will have the idea, it will be under the auspice of the mayor. And then in turn, being a mayoral entity, it will have the ability to touch every agency that is a mayoral agency.
Okay, so it's further down the road, in a couple of years' time, you will know what role this commission would play and what kind of oversight it will have, what is the jurisdiction. At the same time, when you actually are asking folks to vote, is there a mechanism that you have put in place which sort of will spell out how the commissioners will be appointed or selected?
We're figuring that out now. That is actually one of the questions that's currently being sorted out by the lawyers and whatnot.
Right. And the reason why I ask you that question, sorry, let's say just one quick thing.
That's okay. No.
The reason why I ask you that question is that one of the things, and you talked about representation, and you probably already know, and I don't have to sort of educate you about this, but New York City Planning Commission, the manner in which it is actually the commissioners are appointed by different sort of political entities is very problematic, and it has nothing to do with demographics. It has nothing to do with representation of particular sort of income groups or whatever have you. It's
Right.
quite ad hoc. And if you really look at this, they have many of those commissioners stay there for like 15, 20 years.
Mhm.
And so,
I'm sure they probably come from 3 or 4 zip codes. If you really dig deep into it, I don't think they come from all parts of the city.
They don't. They really don't. And that's the reason why I'm bringing this point up, that how this commission is going to be structured moving forward once it becomes part of the charter. That mechanism should be put in place so that people understand, how it's going. How are the commissioners appointed, for example?
Yeah, we would like to do that. We were just trying to see how far we could take that, and that is actually very helpful feedback. So when I have conversations with our attorneys, I can say, I was speaking to community leaders and CB4, and they want it to be more prescriptive about how commissioners are appointed. Because sometimes I can say that and they're like, yeah. But if I say, this is what I'm hearing, I'm in alignment with you. It's helpful for me to say with some authority, like the public will want to know how commissioners are selected.
Right, and the representation is not merely about caste and color and creed. It's
right.
Also about what kind of professional backgrounds they bring to the table. So, for example,
Totally.
The City Planning Commission currently has a majority of them are lawyers.
Yeah.
Right, and that changes the sort of complexion of the kind of ideas they will bring to the table. And
right.
That's what I mean. So when I say take the whole cross section, I don't mean just in terms of demographics, of race, but
lived experience. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Agree. I mentioned earlier when I was a candidate for city council, and one of the things I did say was one of the things I proposed, if I had the power, was to blow up the City Planning Commission, because it doesn't really represent communities. It needs to have a greater use for communities, because and I'm not anti-development. I think development is necessary for our city, but it has to be smart, and it has to be something that with the intent that it benefits the majority of New Yorkers. And it's currently constructed. I know we're kind of going away from Racial Justice Commission, but I just want to get this point out. But a lot of it is like structured around how much money the city can make off a development deal. And we shouldn't really look at development that way, in my personal opinion. I can't speak on the commission's behalf on this, but my personal opinion is like that's what it is. And I hope, now bringing it back to the Racial Justice Commission, that a citywide racial equity plan would force DCP, will force EDC and other of these entities that have intentions of making the most amount of money to factor in racial equity as something that's as important. Having greater racial equity in the development and design and the execution of projects is just as important as the bottom line.
Exactly.
And I think if we don't achieve that, then we failed.
Exactly. And that's what I meant when I talked about jurisdiction. What is the influence of this commission across citywide agencies? Because if it is not there, and if this is just a kind of conversation thing, then it's not very effective. For it to be effective, it must have these tentacles that sort of reach out to the other agencies.
Right.
Shut up. Leslie, go. Sorry.
Just a quick question, Harold, before you go to take care of your little ones. do you plan to share the information that you garnered from these surveys with the department heads of the various agencies? Obviously confidentially, no names would be shared, but what some of the things that popped out, would you be sharing this? Or do you plan to do that in the future when you've codified everything? What are your plans for that?
Yeah, we actually have shared things that were specific to agencies to those agencies already. Our final report will have a more of a comprehensive roadmap where a lot of ideas and suggestions that wouldn't make the proposals will be included, and the agency heads will see that. I mean, we're in the middle of a transition, so and not really a point to show Misha Porter for education, but show David Banks, for example, and whoever Mayor-elect Adams appoints for these agency heads. But we are speaking to agencies as we speak, and sharing what we heard and what some of the ideas that moving forward could look like in their agencies. And they welcome it. A lot of the folks who've been participating welcome the ideas and are rooting for us to get this done and get it passed, so it will embolden the roadmap to actually start producing some outcomes.
Thank
you. Okay.
Well, that's awesome. Harold, we know that your children have been very patient with all of our questions. Thank you so much for coming and joining us this evening.
It was my pleasure.
And then, and if you can, shoot some of that stuff over to Jesse, and then he'll be able to share it with us. The questions that were asked in the surveys, and then even your presentation tonight, if you could, and I assume we can also get that off of the website, but if you could shoot it over our way, that would be great.
Yeah, all the information I shared on the presentation is on the website, not the presentation itself, but all the information.
Got it.
It's just the way it's packaged. So if I could send a presentation. That
would be great. That would be great. All right, then a zillion times, thank you.
Thank you.
Great appreciation, great conversation. It was a very, very fruitful conversation and helpful for me to carry forward. So please, please reach out to me on, as you do more research on these proposals, as more things come out. Love to have a drumbeat of support, going into the new year. So
great. And then we look forward to seeing you early in the new year. So
yes,
that would be lovely.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Great. All right. Thanks, Harold.
All right. Have a good night.
All right.
Take care.
You too. Bye. And then Maria, I know that you joined a little bit late, but one of the things that Jesse mentioned to us is that if we wanted to follow up this evening's presentation with an administrative letter, sort of summarizing, sort of putting forth, like, here are some of the issues that we've addressed on the task force that we hope will be thought about or considered by the Racial Justice Commission. And then we could even attach some of the letters that we've written. That might be, oh dear, I'm throwing things now. That might be a good way to give them some input before they finalize it in 2 weeks, because we can't do like an official letter from our committee or anything, because that wouldn't be timely. Is there interest? Are you guys interested in doing something like that? Doing an administrative letter from this group?
Yes. I think we have to keep the momentum going. The end of the year, things peter out, but we got to get out of the gate, 2022.
I think it's a good idea. I don't remember if we have to vote on that or not, though. I don't.
No, because it's an administrative.
I don't think so. Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why we should do it, and I'll say it aloud, if this commission gets approved by voters and it becomes part of the charter, it's one more agency that this board is going to have to sort of work with. Right. So even from that point of view, it's something that we as a task force, we want to support it because that's what we are actually here for.
Right. Yep.
Katie, I'm just going to sort of interrupt for a brief second. Benjamin, I'm not quite sure if we gave him the chance to introduce himself. There's someone on the panel, Benjamin. Do we know who that is? Benjamin, can you hear us?
If you'd like to take yourself off mute and say hello.
Yes. Because Jesse did mention that there are some new members, so I'm not quite sure if this is one of them.
All right, well, if he takes himself off mute, we will see and he can say hello or lovely. Okay, so then just process wise, I'm not entirely clear. So is this something, I don't even know what an administrative letter looks like. Baron, is this something that you would draft and then share with?
With everybody's help, I think what I gathered from Jesse, and I've done one of these before. I'll put something together, and those who are in this room right now, they at least can comment on it because others haven't been here. But I will circulate it amongst everybody and fairly quickly. So unfortunately, until Thursday afternoon, I'm not able to do much. But I'm going to try and put something together by Thursday.
Okay.
So it will
Or over the-
definitely.
yeah. I
Yeah.
was gonna say, or over the weekend, whatever works for you. We all
Yeah.
know that this is a busy time. Okay. But I think that's great if we could do that and just, yeah, I think to get an administrative letter out, I think that would be lovely.
Yeah, and the basic intent is, Maria also came a little bit later, so I'm going to sort of describe what we discussed with Jesse, but we'll basically dig into a set of recommendations that we have and see if there are any that the commission has not covered. They've been very comprehensive, actually. And Tina, just so that you know, they had multiple town hall meetings, and I did end up attending at least 3 of them. And and that was the time they were also soliciting some of these recommendations. And I did put some of the stuff in there, which we had basically, the board had already approved. Nothing out of there was one which I sort of held back on because it wasn't part of our board's recommendation. The only question that I still am very unclear about is the formation of this commission. It sounds and feels very ad hoc in terms of how it's put together, who decided who's going to be on this commission to start with. And Harold didn't clarify that at all because he's also new, he said, because he wasn't there when this was formed. But that's one of the things that I think kind of puzzling to me because we didn't hear about the entire process. Meaning, for example, nobody came to the community board and saying, you know what, we're forming this commission. What do you have to say?
Right.
And I wonder why that was. Who would be the entity to communicate that information? Who would be responsible for outreach to the community board?
The mayor's office, because the mayor's office decided to put together this commission. That much we know. It was announced in the papers.
But what division? I mean, what was that, what the mayor's office is, pretty wide. Do you have a specific, can we trace it back?
Yes, I think one thing that I do know, and that's something that because when this was announced, I looked up the task force that Harold referred to. I think it's called Social and Racial Justice Task Force, something like that, and it's headed by Mayor's wife.
Oh, right.
And I think it was their recommendation was, that kind of was the push for this commission to be formed following George Floyd protests of last year.
Interesting. Okay.
And it might be half the picture. So I'm going to sort of put this little disclaimer because there might be more to it that I don't know. And I want to actually ask Harold this also, that when you form, a mayor proposes a commission like that, does it get voted by the city council or not? And I didn't quite get to ask him that question, unfortunately. Because
Yeah,
I'm sure
that's
that,
interesting. I like looking back and seeing the roots, like how did we get here?
And from our point of view, it is important, right? Because you're a community board and we also a social and racial justice task force within the community board. So you want to understand, you want to know what sort of moving forward, the level of transparency is how you get formulated. And I have a huge bone of contention when it comes to city planning commission, because it is absolutely a joke.
Yes.
And being nominated for being on that commission, I can tell you why it's a joke.
Yeah, it all feeds into the injustice.
It does. It does. There are different agencies that actually recommend, including Borough President's Office. So these are nominations. And because I was nominated, I recognize that this like doesn't sound very sort of kosher, so to speak.
Mm.
And the other part that sort of troubles me the most is the director of the Planning Commission is also the commissioner of Department of City Planning, and appointed by the mayor.
Hmm.
So there's a lot going on there, which is kind of a little uncomfortable.
Yes.
Mhm.
By
Thank you for
design.
sharing that.
Yeah, a little tricky. All right, so that's super helpful to know about. So, so Viren, you will circulate a draft to us, and then we'll give you comments by the weekend or something, so that then we can try and get something in early next week before they finalize the report. So I think that would be great. And then,
One more thing, Katie, that in case, I mean, we'll manage to do that. In case Jesse's team comes back and says, it's not going to go out until next year. Good news is that Harold said that they would entertain the idea of amending.
right. But if we can get them something,
Oh, yeah.
That would be great in the next, by early next week. I also think that it's worth us maybe talking again at our January task force meeting. I mean, about the possibility of maybe we should think about writing a letter to the new mayor's office and encouraging them to appoint a racial equity officer, right? Or establish a racial equity office now. Now, it's true, I think that work still needs to be done to make sure it's included in the city charter, but I think we don't need to wait. And it would be a great thing for the new mayor's office to do. So anyway, I think that that's something that we can think about. Now, I'm mindful of the time. I know that we discussed the fact, like, it's really important to us that we want to hear from our task force members about the kinds of things that you're interested in us and our task force pursuing in 2022. We don't have a lot of time right now, but I think it would be helpful. I mean, we're a very small group. We could just talk amongst ourselves, but
Katie, can I suggest something, Katie? To be very honest with you, I think we really need to have a session where we have more people.
Oh, I think we absolutely need to have more people, but I'm just wondering, since we're here, does anybody have any ideas that they'd like to share now? I mean, we're definitely going to have this on the agenda for, in the future as well. And like Maria, I know that you maybe can't always attend our task force meetings or very often, but is there anything that has jumped to your mind, or Leslie or Tina, about the task force making sure to address in 2022?
Well, go ahead, Maria.
Thanks. I was going to say nothing specific. I mean, a lot of my thoughts I shared with Viren already. But I was just thinking about, I totally forgot. One of the things I could have mentioned also was the document that Jesse mentioned, and just looking at it again or reevaluating and picking just a few things that could be focused on. I don't know what I would pick, but picking like 2 or 3 things that you could be, well, if we go from January through June or January through July, maybe picking, just being realistic. I don't know. I have this thing, this hang up about not trying to do more than what we
keeping
really
it real,
can do.
as we say.
Yeah. And there's stuff that, like, I know that I was supposed to follow through with here and that I didn't. So I think,
no, but that's helpful. That's a good reminder.
Looking at the document again, and then I guess highlighting or thinking about not all of the goals that were written, but like, what can we do from now through June?
It's interesting because one of the things that ACES is doing is thinking about like literally focusing on just putting together a list of all of the arts related organizations in CB4, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can we even say that we know like what their interests are or whatever if we don't even know who they all are, right? And so we just So a couple of people on the arts, subcommittee have just started focusing on, let's identify all of the arts organizations. And frankly, one of my thoughts is like very much for our task force, let's identify the groups in our community district, our community board district that are focused on racial and social justice issues, right?
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
I think
Yeah.
it would just like, it's very concrete. Let's at least identify them. And
Yeah.
then let's reach out to them and say, hey, we're here. And we would love to know, is there anything we can do on the community board to help support you or some of your current projects? Or like, what are your main goals? You know what I mean? But let there be a conversation. Because again, there are definitely great groups out there doing good work. Let's find out who they are.
I think that's a great idea because too often, grassroots, people in the grassroots, we work in our little silos because there's limited bandwidth. But I think this will be all part of coalition building, which is really important to have, to have like a heavy fist when you need to have it. And, we're all together on this. We might have differences of opinion or different goals or different priorities, but at least we'll be connected.
Yeah, and it could be a feeder for new board appointments as well.
Awesome idea, Leslie.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So like that feels very local and very specific and mostly achievable. I mean, maybe we'll miss a few groups that we haven't heard about, you know what I mean? But I feel like that's something we could focus on.
Great.
Just one quick suggestion. I think we should work with this Racial Justice Commission because they have such sort of width and breadth of ideas that they put together. And I don't mean literally work with them, but the set of ideas that they have on their list, those overlaps is something that we should really identify and explore further because then we're a little more focused because hopefully City Charter is going to approve this and it's going to become part of city's landscape, so to speak. And I noticed a couple of things fairly quickly: housing, health, human services, education, all the issues that we've been sort of talking about. And more than that, they actually are looking at the limitations of the legislative policies and the policy making itself. So that goes far beyond we will ever be able to go. So they're questioning if our land use policies are okay, if our zoning policies are okay. And those are hugely important conversations because one of the things that I personally feel that we have not succeeded in doing is to sort of build bridges across the committees within our own board. And so, when we talk about land use or we talk about transportation policies or we talk about approving outdoor dining or approving a vendor or sort of looking at a land use issue, we don't tie these things together. We don't connect the dots. That actually there's something underlying that needs to be looked at. So I'm going to just give you a very crude example. The very often I speak with Christine on the transportation committee, that every time there's a request for extending this tube by 1 foot, we happily jump on it because it's part of the historical district and it's beyond. We have stoops all over Chelsea. But then I remind her that we also have only 3 foot of sidewalk, for example. So we don't speak about equity, but equity goes both ways, right? And right of way becomes an issue of equitable streets as well, as much as it is something that you want to encourage or entertain because there's a character of the neighborhood and historical district and blah, blah, blah. And all of those points are extremely important, but they have this kind of, they dovetail with issues that we typically don't think about.
Yeah. So I guess, one possibility is we could say like, maybe we want to try and make sure that here on the task force, there are members from each of the other committees, right? Now, already we have several members represented, right? I'm on ACES and HHHS, and Maria's the co-chair of HHHS, and we have quite a bit of representation, but But yeah, I do think it would be good to make sure that we have all of the committees represented here. But also, I think it's also part of our job then on full board to be bringing our awareness and perspective to the discussions about the various,
Mhm.
letters and review of positions and things. So
Right.
it sort of goes both ways.
I think that's a great idea through that lens to really let's create a web of
Mhm.
inclusivity so that
Mhm.
we have points of view coming to us and going out to the different committees. One specific thing I'd like to bring up to Maria is the issue I feel of racial inequity in terms of TPT foreclosures, which have really affected mostly people of color.
I don't know what you said, Tina.
Oh, this TPT foreclosures, it's basically the city foreclosing upon people, mostly Black and brown people who own, HDFC housing. It's a sort of, I don't want to get into the weeds here. We can discuss it offline, but it is a problem that's affecting the lives very, very deeply of home ownership among low and moderate income homeowners. Many of them are first-time homeowners. And, if you live in a co-op and you have a bad board, you're out of luck unless you have some building, some traction there. And unfortunately, the city, the percentage of co-ops versus HDFC co-ops that are on the list for foreclosure is inordinately slanted against Black and brown people. So what I can do is maybe share. Maybe I'll send an email with a letter from CB9's recent position, and it does delineate some information. It's fairly easily digestible that demonstrates and explains a little bit more where I'm coming from. So I don't want to take up too much bandwidth, but it is something that it's really horrible. It's a really, really horrible thing.
And is there, I know nothing about this topic, but one, it sounds like this might be a topic that would be interesting to have a presentation on, so we can, as a group, dig into it a little bit more and see how it impacts our residents.
Yeah.
And whether or not there's
it does affect more people. There are more HDFCs up in Harlem, but that doesn't mean we ethically should ignore it.
Right, and presumably there are at least some here in our own district.
Yes.
So yeah.
Tina, is this something you mentioned a few years ago? I feel like that you were talking about co-ops for a while, a couple of months ago. I remember it being at Mount Sinai West.
Yeah,
but I don't know if it was the same exact thing.
No, this is a little different. There's policy. The whole HDFC thing is a big chunk to tackle. But if we can focus on just this one element of foreclosure, where people are basically, co-ops basically are not paying their water bills for whatever reason, and their state income taxes, and they fall behind, and they have usury.
Wait, your voice just stopped.
Yeah, and basically the city really saddles them with high percentage interest rates on their, with what they're not paying when they're, and you'll read the letter. I don't want to take up too much space.
Yeah, thanks.
It's definitely.
If you could email it to us.
Yeah, why don't I email
Katie and Varen?
Yeah, and then you guys can disseminate it. But it's sad because people basically lose their home equity. They become renters. The city gives it to developers. They don't have to come current with those back taxes or those water bills. They come into ownership of these buildings clean, and the owners become renters. So it's a terrible thing. The mayor, I'm a part of the HDFC coalition. We had a meeting with the mayor, and he promised to put a hold on these foreclosures. And he didn't.
And he didn't keep to
No, he
his
did
word.
not.
Well, what a surprise.
What a surprise.
All
How
right,
many
well, it does
things have
sound
we
like,
been
and
dealing
whether
with
it's
lately?
HHHS that does this, or maybe our two our task force and HHHS have a
Yes.
joint,
Yeah.
discussion about it, like whatever, we'll be able to, figure that out. Now,
Well,
again, I
Katie,
am
now
mindful
that
of the-
you're a co-secretary, you have to attend the exec meetings, don't you?
I think so.
That might be a place to talk
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Leslie, is there anything you wanted to share tonight? Any ideas before we race
No,
this
nothing
again?
else that's been shared.
Okay, great, good, okay. Then with that, I think this was a really interesting meeting tonight, and sorry we didn't have more of us here, but and in fact, that's one of the issues we also want to address is, do we need to pick a different day, or to make sure that more of our task force members are able to attend on a regular basis. So maybe we'll do a survey out about that or something to try and figure out what
Yeah,
works.
Katie, I was thinking, I don't know if that's something that we should do. I think we might have to do it through Jesse. And we can just make a doodle poll and see if we get responses. Jesse himself had some issues, which is why it's going to be much harder for us to come up with a day, because he said he's looked at all the possibilities and third Tuesday seems to be the best time.
Yeah, I think he said there was maybe one or two other possibilities, but all right, we'll see what we can figure out. But with that, everybody, I do wish you a very happy holidays.
You too.
And
Thank
I really
you.
thank you, the hardy ones who actually show up. Thank you.
Exactly.
And
Happy
I'm not even on
holidays.
this committee anymore,
Oh, you are.
Well,
But
task
you were here
force, yeah.
anyway, Maria.
but I'm
Yeah,
here
you.
anyway.
You
Oh,
are
girl. Okay. Have a nice holiday, everyone.
Happy
Stay
Bye.
holidays.
Stay
Katie,
safe.
let's chat.